the office can help, that will help me out, because right now I don't have access to the chat. So I appreciate everybody joining today. We're going to talk about a couple of updates. We're going to talk about the importance of language, and then a couple of reminders. Our SCDE website contains, Peter, if you'll mute yourself, I think that may be you that I'm hearing. Or maybe not. Folks, if you'll mute yourselves, or Carolyn, if you can help. The Security Act, the suicide awareness and prevention during this time, the ESSA waivers, which right now have to do with the title funds, but may actually extend IDEA funds to be spent out for another year. We'll see. And then guidance for handling school and homework packets. Again, all of that is on the ed.sc.gov website. A couple of federal updates. When Congress signed the CARES Act, which is that additional funding that will go to all states and then be distributed by district through formula funding, similar to the way we do Title I funding. This will be funding that goes out to all districts, whether you have Title I schools or not. It's just that the funding formula for that is what will be used. But 30 days after Congress signed that report, the U.S. Education Department has a report that is due to Congress, which will be about 3 weeks from now, that has information about any additional flexibility or waivers that the USED will be asking for. This is where we could expect to see some additional waivers or temporary and targeted relief related to IDEA. And although that is due in about 3 weeks, what we're hearing out of DC is that we may actually get some information a little sooner than 3 weeks. Please know that we will pass that on just as quickly as we get it. Again, this is information that Congress will use to decide where the U.S. Department of Ed has additional flexibility. And we'll pass that on just as quickly as we get it. I want to talk about, for just a minute, how important language is during this time. Some of you may have seen the article that came out of one of the universities in Georgia about this is not homeschooling, this is not online schooling. These are continued educational opportunities that we are providing to families that can take advantage of them. For any of you who have been involved in true homeschooling, you know how different this is than that. There's a very structured process that you go through for homeschooling to be approved, and then a very structured process that you go through to provide that instruction in a homeschool setting. The same can be said of a virtual school or an online school. Again, so my staff, we have really tried hard not to refer to this as homeschooling, but rather continued educational opportunities. And I think, again, this may seem like semantics, but I think that the language and the words that we use to communicate at this time are going to be critical. I think the use of the phrase continued educational opportunities takes some of the pressure off of everybody. We do not expect teachers, district staff, parents, families, communities to be able to replicate the 7 hours of instruction that's provided by our appropriately credentialed people in a traditional school setting. We don't expect that to happen at this point, nor should we expect it. So referring to what we're doing at this point, using the phrase continued educational opportunities rather than homeschooling, I think is important. Another important difference to make is that we are talking about contingency learning plans. We are talking about how we are providing practical and reasonable access to these continued educational opportunities for our students with disabilities. We are not talking about amending IEPs and changing the way we are providing FAPE. Again, we are not providing typical educational opportunity or instruction. So we're talking about some temporary targeted changes in service delivery. The other distinction that we need to make is between what we typically consider as compensatory services, and those are services that are due to a student, excuse me, when there has been a denial of FAPE through some oversight or error on a school or district's part. So we are not talking about providing compensatory services to students when all of this is over and we reopen schools. We're talking about providing supplemental services to students due to the school closures. And so again, I think language is important as we go along, and making some of these distinctions will be important. Again, we are using a lot of the language that we take from the Andrew F. case. We're talking about access and opportunities for students that are appropriate in light of the student's current circumstances. In other words, in light of the fact that we have schools that are closed due to a global pandemic. Those are the circumstances under which we're operating at this time. So we're talking about reasonable and practical access that are appropriate to these circumstances. We talked last week about the phrase temporary and targeted flexibility. We are not asking or expecting permanent waivers of IDEA due process rights for anybody, but we are looking at what kinds of temporary and targeted flexibility could be provided under these circumstances. We are ensuring that to the maximum extent practicable, we are providing access to students with disabilities. And again, that emphasizing that health and safety needs come first before anything else. And this includes mental health needs, not just physical health needs. We've talked a little bit the last couple of weeks about how we need to be taking care of our own mental health needs. There was a survey that was put out, I think it was through Council for Administrators of Special Education through CASE, that asked SPED directors across the nation, do you have parents that are asking to have services stopped at this point? And I was surprised to see the percentage, and again, I don't know how many folks responded, but that it was almost a 50-50 split between the number or the percentage of parents who are saying, we don't want services, we can't handle things right now, we're really grappling with some more basic survival needs at this point. So health and safety needs for everybody come first, and we've got to understand that this includes mental health needs. And I can't emphasize enough making good faith efforts. Um, Attempting communication with parents, those consultations, the communication, the discussions, the trying to come to terms with in providing that reasonable and practical access, and documenting your good faith efforts. We've had calls and questions about, and again, you know, we say that misery loves company, and that there's some truth to that, because when I'm on the calls with other state directors of special education, I'm hearing the same things from everybody, whether it's a teeny tiny state like Rhode Island or a huge state like Texas. Everybody's getting the same questions, everybody's got the same concerns, everybody's grappling with the same issues. And it does help to know that this is not something unique to us. Um, South Carolina is unique in so many ways, but in this situation, we are not alone or unique. And the importance of open communication with parents and families, and the documentation and making of good faith efforts. We have received some calls and concerns about the fact that, you know, we're trying to provide all of this. We can't get into contact with families, or they're not returning our calls, or they're not getting back to us. Those, again, it's documentation. It's those continued good faith efforts that we're making along the way. So again, to just talk about language and be intentional with the language that we're using, making sure that we are being flexible, that we are being reassuring, that we are communicating that we are all trying to do the best we can in a situation that nobody wrote a guidebook for, that I'm aware. And that we're all trying to figure out how to do this together. And the more we can work together, the more we have open communication, the better. Just a couple of reminders. Special education services, and I'm preaching to the choir with this group, but special education services are provided for the sole purpose of enabling a student with a disability to access gen ed instruction. Special ed is not different, it's not separate, it's not apart, and you've all heard me refer to the IEP as the vehicle through which that child accesses general education. If general ed has changed, then special ed support may very well need to change in light of that. And so we have to look at what kinds of continued educational opportunities are we providing for all kids through the gen ed setting, and then ask the question, what does our special ed support for that in order for the child to access this need to look like? Don't assume that just because there has been a change in the way we're delivering services during school closures, that students are not receiving FAPE. And that's, when you think about it, sort of a no-brainer. But I also say that to say that I think, speaking from my point of view, that when we had such significant changes with everything with school closures, my first thought was, we can't continue providing special ed and related services the way we always have. Therefore, that's a huge issue. Well, we're not providing gen ed instruction the way we always have. So we've really got to take a breath and think about what's going on and how we can continue to make these efforts to ensure equitable access. A reminder of something else that came up on a call the other day. Please remind teachers and staff not to use their personal email accounts for communication with parents and students. There was call with state directors, and someone from a smaller state with lots of rural areas indicated that not all of their schools staff continue to have access to school email accounts for some reason, and that teachers had begun communicating using their Yahoo accounts or Gmail accounts. Just remember that our school accounts should have all of our safetyware, all of our I just completely lost the word I was looking for. Our school accounts should be the accounts that we're using when we're communicating, especially any information that may be confidential in nature or any kind of personally identifiable information. So please remind folks to make sure that they're using their school or district email accounts for communication and documentation purposes as we go through this. When we, before I go on to this one, I did want to say that with the funding that came out through the CARES Act, there have been lots of suggestions, of course, on how to use those funds. And one of the first things that came to a lot of folks' minds was, let's put devices in the hands of our kids that don't have devices. And this is for all kids, not just kids with disabilities, but let's put devices in the hands, because some of our districts are one-to-one, maybe only for middle and high school and not for elementary, or they may be one-to-one for 3rd through 12th grade and not for pre-K through 2nd. Our issue isn't necessarily kids having access to devices. In our more rural areas, the issue is the infrastructure to support the devices. It's the speed of internet access, and in some of our more rural areas where we're trying to deliver instruction virtually, there are 3 to 5 second delays, or there's the constant buffering. For those of you who were around when we first got dial-up, think back to that time. And even though we are supposedly all accessing high-speed internet, we just have to remember that high speed in one place is not necessarily what we consider high speed in another. So I know that as we look at how these additional funds will be distributed and what they will be used for, districts will need to begin thinking through this kind of thing, and more information is going out soon to districts about how to use these funds. There are about 12 buckets that the funds could be used for, and IDEA activities are part of those allowable uses. Meetings that you're having. If you've got what you need to conduct a meeting, initial eligibility, initial IEP, reeval, annual review, and you can conduct it through alternative means, then go ahead and do that. And so a couple of examples. And you're going to have to, again, making good faith efforts and decisions based on student needs. That should be your mantra. That's how you should make all the decisions you're making at this point, is what is it that I can get to a student to help ensure equitable access. So here's an example. You have, before schools closed, you had pretty much gathered all of the information you needed for an initial eligibility determination, except your OT had not been able to finish her part of the eval that had to do with fine motor skills. But you have everything already that you need as far as eligibility criteria to meet using the SEED document. Now, again, you don't necessarily have everything you need in order to determine all of the students' educational needs, because you needed the OT, the fine motor stuff as well for that. But you do have everything you need to determine eligibility under the SEED. If it's in that child's best interest to go ahead with that eligibility determination and develop that initial IEP, then do that. Again, it's making good faith efforts, and as long as you can fall back on the decision that you make being in the best interest of that particular child, that's the decision you make at this point. And we will deal with whatever needs to be dealt with when we open schools again. Another example may be that you have a child, maybe it's a C to B transition, baby net to school age, or you had a child come in through your child find at age 3 or 4 or 5, and you've gathered just about everything you need, except you were looking for more information to rule in or rule out autism. And so you've done everything you needed other than your autism rating scales or your autism evaluation part, like you had planned to do an ADOS. But you've got everything else, and everything else that you have points to the fact that this child is probably eligible under the category of developmental disabilities. If it's in that child's best interest, the team could go ahead and determine, if the child meets all the criteria under DD, that the child is DD. You can put an initial IEP in place if you have everything you need for that. And then again, we'll deal with whatever we need to down the road. There are no blanket statements at this point. Not that there are ever blanket statements with IDEA to begin with. I used to joke that the only decision that got to be made by a single person for a child with a disability was what he was going to wear to school in the morning. All other decisions have to be made by a team. So with this, you're going to have to make individual decisions based on whatever that particular child's individual needs are in order to get that kid what he needs right now. What you can't do is to take, like we talked about last time, to take an assessment that is designed for a face-to-face administration. If it's not been piloted and normed for any other type of administration, then you can't change it and I know this is probably being recorded, pardon my language, you can't bastardize it to make it into something it's not and get valid and reliable results from it. But if you have the information that you need to make these decisions based on that child's unique needs, then go ahead and do what you need to do. And some of these other details we will we'll sort out later. Another situation might be that you've got a child that's eligible under SLD for math, for example, and you were going to collect some additional information about reading because the child was struggling in reading at that point. If through an IEP meeting that you've got enough information to kind of to justify adding reading support or accommodations to that IEP, make decisions based on what that child needs to access what's going on now. I am not saying, I'm not giving a blanket statement that you go out and complete evaluations or eligibility determinations without all the pieces you need. What I'm saying is use some common sense, look at what you've got, and make decisions that are based on students' unique needs and what they need at this point to access whatever's going on. Couple of questions about confidentiality using teletherapy, I will refer you back to our website. The information, there's information on there about teletherapy and HIPAA, and that for each of our therapy groups, like occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech language therapy, there is specific guidance out there with those areas as well. All information, any information in which you're sending PII through, any means you're sending PII through, should have adequate safety features. If you have to encrypt it, make sure that you are being sensitive to PII as well. The survey's due today. I know Carolyn had sent out a reminder. Here's another. Yep, that's it as far as that's concerned. The questions through the website have slowed down a little bit. Please continue submitting those. The group will be meeting to look at any new questions we've gotten. There are national calls that occur sometimes as frequently as 2 or 3 times a week. And in my call yesterday with the state directors, we were encouraged that we might get some additional guidance or news on some of this targeted temporary flexibility sooner rather than later. But again, that report to Congress has to be in, I think the official date is the 27th of April. The U.S. Department of Ed has spent the last several weeks collecting input and concerns and questions from the field, and is now at the point of writing the report that will go to Congress. And so we do understand that we may have news a little sooner rather than later. Please know that we will pass that on just as quickly as we get it. I appreciate everything everyone is doing. Sandy, were there any other questions in the chat box? And I may be able to get to the chat box at this point.
Nope, we have answered all of the questions unless there are a few others that we're waiting on.
All right, I appreciate what everybody's doing. I will send out, this is a very short PowerPoint, we'll post it and send it out. Carolyn and our IT folks have been so great to be able to turn this around and get it up very quickly. Jolene did ask about, rather than compensatory services, what we're calling them are supplemental services or supplemental school closure services. We may need to have a contest for a catchy acronym as kind of a break from, or with a little bit of levity, but right now we're calling them supplemental school closure services. Thank you for all you're doing. Take care, and we'll be in contact either next Wednesday or sooner if we know something with the language. Thank you.